Today we're getting started on our drill press table. And the main part of the drill press table is going to consist of a few layers. I've got 2 layers of 3/4 inch Baltic birch, and I'm going to cover that with a layer of plastic laminate. But before I do any of the layering here, I'm going to talk about the shape a little bit. Now, if you're following along with the plans, we give all the dimensions to where any of the cutouts or inserts are going to be, but it's a good idea to take your plywood over to the drill press and double check a few things. Now I found that this table that comes with the drill press is a little bit wider than most drill press tables. So I actually widened my top a little bit so that I could move the cutouts for my clamps out a little bit further. If I would have just built it to the plans, I would have found later that these cutouts are actually going to be where the table is. So it's a good thing that I double checked that. So you also want to center your top on the table. So I've marked my center point of my top, and I'll bring it down, locate it with the bit. And then I also want to double check the size of my insert so that it fit. I know it's going to fit the largest accessory that I have. In this case, it's this sanding drum. So I've made it wide enough that it's going to fit that later, and it's located in the right spot. And the last thing is, on the plans, it has a cutout here on the back of the drill press, and that's just so you could slide it back to fit around the post. I also found that if I slide this back any further than what it is, it's going to interfere with my handle that's used to raise and lower the drill press. So I really don't need to add that on this top. So I'm going to just forego that cutout. So once I have it all laid out and I have it, a good plan here, I'm ready to start laminating the top. Now, I mentioned we're using 3/4 inch Baltic birch here, and that's a material we like to use a lot on our shop jigs and shop furniture. And that's because it's got quite a few plies on it, so it's really stable and it's going to stay flat. If you can't find Baltic birch or you find it's too expensive, you could probably just use another 3/4 inch plywood that you get at your home centers. Just try to find something that's pretty good quality and it's going to be flat. Now, the construction process of this top is a little bit different. I'm not going to just glue all the layers together. I've got my shape laid out here, and I've saved that on another sheet of paper because I'm going to cover that up with the laminate first. So how I'm going to do this is I'm going to laminate my top layer of plywood, and then I'm going to cut all the shapes out of that, and I'm going to use that top layer as the template for the bottom layer. I just find it's easier to cut through 1 3/4 inch piece of plywood and get that all shaped out rather than trying to cut through 1.5 inches of plywood and get a nice, smooth, clean surface. So I'm going to start by laminating my top layer. So I'm going to get this bottom piece out of here. Just put that down here in the oven. Let it cook for later. Okay. So I'm using a spray-on contact adhesive. You can also use the brush-on gel or other contact cement you might have seen. But I really like this spray-on adhesive. It has a really low odor. It goes on fast, and it doesn't make quite the mess, I've found. So I'm just going to spray this on the laminate. I get a nice even coat, so I'm going to go at it at the other direction too in a perpendicular pattern. Okay, I'm going to get this out of the way. I can spray my plywood. Okay, now I just need to let this tack off for a few minutes, and I'm ready to join the 2 pieces. All right, once it's dry to the touch on both surfaces, it's ready to join. Now, a little word of warning, like the name implies, contact cement, once these 2 pieces touch, they're going to be permanent. So you really want to be careful here when you're setting it in place. I've cut the laminate about 1/2 inch wide and long on all sides, so I've got plenty of leeway here. But I kind of want to just get it, lined up in place and press it down in the middle and kind of work my way out from there. So I've got good contact all the way around. Now I can come in either with a J-roller or even a scrap piece of 2x4 that has the rounded edge, and I just want to, smooth out from that edge, make sure that I have all the bubbles out and good contact. So I'm going to do that. The only thing with the J-roller or the 2x4 block is when you get out towards that edge, you don't want to press down on the parts that are hanging over, so you got to be really mindful of that. So I'll work my way out from the center here. Just making sure not to roll over those edges too bad when I get to the edge. Okay, once I have that secured, I'm ready to flush trim the laminate and start shaping this top. Okay, I'm going to prop up my top here on a couple pieces of 1/2" MDF that I've stuck down with some double-sided tape, and that is just going to add clearance for my bearing that's going to ride along this edge here. And I'm using a flush trim bit. You can see it has a bearing here, and it's just going to, like the name implies, it's going to flush trim the laminate to the size of the plywood. So I'll go ahead and get started here. As you can see, I have the laminate flush trimmed to my plywood. And a little tip, once you get it trimmed, I'd come back with the J-roller and just hit those edges one last time. Make sure you have them all sealed now that you're not worried about cracking that laminate that was overhanging before. Now you can see that I've finished the layout here on the top. And I've used a white colored pencil just to make it more visible on this black laminate. If you don't have a white colored pencil, you could just use some masking tape, cover up the spots where you're doing your layout, and just use a regular pencil or even a marker to help you see it a little bit better. So now that I have it laid out, I'm going to rough cut everything with a jigsaw. But before I do that, I'm going to come in here on these inside cutouts and drill some access holes at the drill press before I get started. Okay, I have my access holes all drilled, and those are just so I can slip my blade in as I'm jigsawing the inside cutouts here. As you can see, I did these on the drill press. If you're building this drill press table and you don't have a drill press, you can obviously do those with your hand drill as well. So now I'm ready to get started here. As I cut, I'm going to stay inside the lines about 1/8 inch, just because I'm going to come back and clean that up with the router anyways. So I want to, keep it within 1/8 inch so the router's not working too hard, but not get too close to the lines where there might be chip out or I might, slip on the wrong side of the line. One more thing to note is if you have an oscillating setting on your jigsaw, you want to turn that off. That's just going to make a little bit less aggressive cut and less chance of chip out on your laminate. All right, it looks like the jigsaw did a really good job there. I don't have any chip out that went outside my layout lines. Just a word of advice, if it does happen to go a little bit outside the lines, we are going to come back here, and this opening will get routed out a little bit more for the insert, and then these openings are all going to get an 1/8 inch chamfer, so that might clean it up. But really, these openings are kind of just arbitrary sizes, so if you had to come back with your flush trim router and make these openings just a little bit bigger, that would be fine too. So they look pretty good though, so I'm ready to move on to get set up to route these all out. Okay, I've got all my parts to start routing this middle insert opening. And if you're following along with the plans, it does say to make a template for this, but we only have one of these openings, so it doesn't really make sense to make a whole template just for this one opening. So I'm just going to use some straight edge pieces, but I've made a small block here that's going to help me set up where those go. I'm going to set it here on the layout lines. I'm actually going to stick a little bit of double-sided tape in there just to hold it in place temporarily. It's not much, but I don't really want it to stick for too long. There. I have to pop that out in a second. And the reason I'm using this setup piece here is because I have to come back later and make an insert that fits this hole. So I want to make sure all the sides are square and it's pretty parallel. It's just going to be a lot easier after the fact. So now I can take my straight edges here. And I'm going to stick these on so I don't have to cut them to size. I'm going to kind of stick them on here. Use one to kind of line it up, and then I'll come back with the next long piece here. As you can see, I'm kind of putting this in a pinwheel pattern here, and that's so I don't have to cut all the pieces to size, like I mentioned. Get the last piece stuck on there. And hopefully I can pop this middle one out. Yep, there we go. Comes right off. Now I've got an opening here that I can use my flush trim bit to trim this out. All right. You can see we have a nice clean opening here. Remove all the excess tape now. So next I need to route all the clamp cutouts to shape. And I can come back and do the same thing where I've used my straight edges in a pinwheel pattern and do each one of those, but all four of these are the exact same shape. So I did go ahead and make a pattern to do those. So I made this pattern the same way I did this cutout. I started by laying it out on this half-inch MDF. I rough cut the size with my jigsaw, and then I came back with my straight edges to form the pattern, and then I flush trimmed it all with the router. So now I have a nice smooth template that I can use for my clamp cutout. So I'll go ahead and tape this down on each one of those and route those out as well. I've got my laminated top now all cut to shape and smoothed out, and it's ready to glue to the next layer of plywood. So you can see I started with an oversized piece of plywood here, and then I brought in my finished piece and used that to trace the shape of the outside and then all of the inside cutouts. Then once again, I took it over to the drill press and drilled some access holes for my jigsaw. Then I used my jigsaw to cut a rough shape of all the openings, leaving enough that I can come back with the router later and clean those up. So now I'm ready to glue these two pieces together. I could use the contact adhesive I used before with the laminate, but I feel like just a yellow wood glue is going to give me a better wood-to-wood bond here. And just not using the contact adhesive, I'm going to have a little bit of leeway to move this around and get it in position before it permanently sticks. So let's get started. I'm going to start squirting some glue on here. I'm going to be careful around all the edges just so I don't have a lot of squeeze out to clean up later. Get enough on here where I can start spreading it around and see where I'm at. Okay. I'm going to spread that around a little bit and just see kind of where I'm at glue-wise. I'm just using an old gift card. I feel like those make good glue spreaders. So if anybody has any old gift cards or even new gift cards, you can send them to me. I'll use them. even if they have money on them, I don't mind. Just want a thin layer here, so if there's any spots that are kind of pooling, spread those out, and if you have any kind of glue-starved spots, you can add a little bit as you go. All right, I feel like that's pretty good. You can see I'm not all the way out to the edges, but remember, part of that's going to be routed away, and some of this glue is going to squeeze out as I get it clamped here. So I'm going to put my top piece on, kind of get it in position here. I'm going to grab some riser blocks here so I can get some clamps underneath. All right, this is where you're going to need all of your clamps. So you can start clamping, kind of watching it, make sure it doesn't slide around too far out of position. This is where it kind of helps having these cutouts too. You can kind of get clamps everywhere. The other tip is when you're gluing up two pieces that you want to use one as the template later to route, you want to have that one up, because if you have it down, all the glue squeeze out is going to run along these nice clean edges, and it's going to give you a really rough bearing surface to route the other side. So always have that up. As you're clamping, look for nice squeeze out along the edges. Make sure you got good clamping pressure and no gaps. So I'll just get the rest of the clamps on here and we'll let it dry and we'll come back and route it. All right, the drill press top is really starting to take shape here. We're coming down the home stretch. You can see after the glue dried here on this bottom layer of plywood, I went ahead with a flush trim bit with the router and trimmed that to shape all the way around. Then I came back with a chamfer bit and eased the edge on the perimeter, on the top and bottom, and inside these clamping cutouts. And the reason for that is twofold. Plastic laminate can be pretty sharp, and I don't want to cut myself on that later, so that leaves a nice eased edge there where I'm not going to do that. And the other reason is I'm less likely to catch that edge of the laminate with either a finger or workpiece and tear that up or chip it later. So it's just going to help it last and just be safer in general. So the next step is to add the replaceable insert here in the middle. I'm going to use 1/2" MDF for this rather than plywood, and that's because I know 1/2" MDF is always going to be a 1/2". With plywood, it can vary in thickness, like a 1/2" thick plywood might be a 32nd of an inch narrower, so if I need to go replace this later, I know it's always going to be a 1/2". So I can cut my rabbet here to hold that at a 1/2", and I'm good to go. So to do that, I'm going to cut this rabbet using a rabbeting bit, obviously. And I have the bearing set up, so it's going to cut a 1/4 inch wide rabbet, and I need to cut it a 1/2" deep. But I'm going to do that in 2 passes. So I'm going to make a pass at a 1/4 inch, then I'm going to come back with my material, set up the final depth of the cut, and make that final pass. We have the rabbet form for our replaceable insert, and now we need to fit it. So how I do it is I like to sneak up on the length and the width of this to get it kind of fit to square, and then I come back and form the roundovers. And to do that, I like to take a circle template to my bit and find a circle that's about the right size, and come over here and transfer that onto my piece. And then after I cut that with the bandsaw to rough shape and do a little sanding, you should have an insert that will drop right in. You don't want to fit here that's too tight that you're going to struggle to get this out later, because it's going to be on your drill press and you don't want to take this off to get underneath to pop it out. So you want a nice fit, but not too tight. And another thing is, I recommend once you get one that fits, to go ahead and make 2 or 3, use this as a template, and then just take it over the router table and flush trim it to size. And as you remember, we used that square piece to set up this hole, so we know this is, the sides are parallel and square, so you can drop this in, use up, one spot, flip it over, use up the other, kind of use all sides, to back up so it's, you're not chewing it up and throwing it away as often. So now that we have our insert ready to go, the last step is to add our T-track for our fence and accessories on this top. We're going to do that over at the table saw. All right, we're here at the table saw. I'm ready to cut my dados to hold the T-track. I'm doing a little setup here. I got the fence set up to locate my dado from the side. And then to set up the height of my dado blade, I like to just use the T-track itself. And I want to bring it up to the height and then just a hair over. So we're going to overcut this depth by about a 1/16 of an inch or a 32nd. One other thing I like to do when I have a project with laminate, I'm going to run it on the table saw. I like to put down a couple strips of masking tape. I'm going to just do that in a few spots. And the reason I'm putting down this masking tape is I want to protect the surface of the laminate as I'm running across the table. You might consider it a bit obsessive, but you don't want to scratch your new sports car before you get it off the car lot. With the dados cut here in the top, I'm ready to start installing the T-track. Now the T-track's just made out of aluminum, so you can cut it with your, to your table saw or chop saw. Preferably with a non-ferrous blade would be best, but you could also just cut it down with a hacksaw as well. And just a word of warning, if you have a saw stop, make sure to disengage the safety mechanism, because if you try to cut through aluminum, it's going to engage the safety mechanism and you're going to be buying a whole new cartridge and blade, speaking from experience. So, now that I have it cut to length, I've also chamfered all the edges on here to match the chamfer on the edge of my table. You can do that with a file or again with your table saw or chop saw. So get this lined up. I'm going to pre-drill holes with a Vicks bit, or also known as a self-centering bit. Now by using that self-centering bit, it's going to drill the pilot hole right in the middle of those pre-drilled holes. So that way I'm not just trying to put a screw in and it's pushing the T-track one way or the other. So now with that done, I can add the screws and this T-track is ready to go. Okay, now a couple things to mention with the screws on the T-track. You want to use the right size heads so that they are either flush or buried with that bottom of the T-track, or they're going to interfere with your T-slot bolts or hex head bolts, whatever you're using here in the T-track later. The other thing is I mentioned that we want to cut the dado just a hair deeper than the T-track, and that's because if this T-track is standing proud of the table, it's not going to clamp down as well with your fence or accessories. So you want that either just flush or a little bit below the surface. Okay, so with that T-track installed, I'm ready to show you how to mount this to the table. I've got my drill press table here in position. I've taken the time to center it on the bit, and then I've located it far enough forward where I know it's not going to interfere with the crank here in the back. And then I've also taken the time to make sure it's squared up on the front of the stock table that's already on the drill press. So with it located, I'm going to come underneath. I'm going to trace some pencil marks here in the through slots that are already on the stock table. Okay. With those marked, I'm going to flip it over. Bottom of my table. I can pre-drill some holes, and if I think I'm going to, attach this top permanently, I can use a leg with a washer up through that slot to attach it. But honestly, I find some hardware here, that I often take the table on and off for some reason or another. So I would actually use a threaded insert in the table, and then you can use a studded knob to attach it, and then it's easy enough to take it on and off and reattach it over time. So get these out of the way. Once you have your mounting hardware installed, get that top permanently attached, and then you're ready to come back, and in the next videos we'll build a fence for this drill press tabletop, and then in a future video we're actually going to also build an optional drawer storage system with dust collection in it. So stay tuned for those. Thanks.